right, welcome back to the A Little Crazy podcast. I'm not David Magee. I am Phoebe Goodwin, and today we're having a girls' day on the A Little Crazy podcast. I'm so excited about our guest we have today. McCall Dempsey started Southern Smash, a program of the National Alliance for Eating Disorders, which is the nation's leading nonprofit organizations providing support, education, and referrals for all people experiencing eating disorders as well as their loved ones. And you are actually in Oxford for an event
Southern
tomorrow.
Smash event.
Yeah.
That's right.
Okay, so tell me about your journey. So you grew up in Louisiana and kind of lived this picture-perfect life on the outside. You went to Ole Miss, joined a sorority, met a boy, fell in love, and then all the while you were dying and no one knew. So tell me about when that started and your journey of finding recovery.
Yeah. So I born and raised in Baton Rouge, Louisiana, and had that typical all-American upbringing. However, I always felt not good enough. And I feel like we can all relate to not feeling good enough in whatever way that manifests, whether it's grades or body or careers. And I was a very sensitive child. And when I was in high school, so often you get all these messages from diet culture, from the world around you. And I started cutting back here and there, and it exploded into an eating disorder. But the thing with eating disorders is that you cannot see them. They affect every race, gender, socioeconomic level, every human. The only requirement to have an eating disorder is to have a body. And so, but in my mind, you had to look like the starving celebrity on the cover of Us Weekly to warrant help. And I did not look like that. And so I kept my eating disorder a secret, but I honestly did not even realize I could say, hey, I'm struggling with an eating disorder. Because for so long I thought people would think I was crazy or wanting attention. And so when I came to Ole Miss my freshman year, I was definitely in the throes of my eating disorder, but I kept thinking that I will be better when. Like this voice in my head, again, I couldn't call it an eating disorder yet. This voice in my head will go away when. And so for me, I thought, when I get to college, that's when it's going to go away because now my life can start. And so as I got here to Ole Miss, you know, so many people were worried about grades and getting the classes or sorority or social life. And I was terrified of the freshman 15. And so my mom, unbeknownst to her that her daughter has a debilitating eating disorder, said, well, I keep my weight in check with a scale. And again, we so often correlate weight with health. And what we know to be true is that BMI is it's not an accurate indicator of health. And also, like, we indicate that being thin is a that makes you worthy. And so we put the scale in the shopping cart at Target or Walmart. And I got to school, and sure enough, that freshman year, I did not gain weight. I lost weight. And of course, it was met with so much praise because any type of weight loss is considered like the most successful achievement that we can have, right? It wasn't that, oh, I was getting great grades or, oh, I was going out and having fun. It was, oh my gosh, you lost weight, McCall. And so that really continues to pump the eating disorder, you know, fueling that mindset. And one thing I always talk about when I travel and talk to college students or anyone is that, you know, how to comment on someone's body, don't. Because you don't know if you're commenting on eating disorder, depression, cancer, but you're also playing into your worth is tied up into your weight. And so I just kept ping-ponging between all of the different diagnostic codes of anorexia, bulimia, binge eating, OSFED. I mean, you name it. And I just kind of catapulted from one to the other. And again, we have that mindset that an eating disorder, you have to fit perfectly within the guidelines of this diagnostic code. And that is far from the truth. And so that just continued to push me to not get help. And the tipping point came in 2009, 08. I had graduated, married my college sweetheart, you know, and I just kept thinking life will be better when. And it didn't. It just continued that eating disorder and that secret. And I started doing triathlons because, again, I thought I'm going to get healthy. But again, I'm debilitating, raging eating disorder that was using exercise as a behavior. And I told my triathlon coach, who later became a soul sister, best friend, godmother to my son, that, hey, I'm taking these diet pills. And I thought it's no big deal. It's just the pills. Get rid of them. Thankfully, she was and is an incredible person that instead of saying, oh, yeah, I'll just take them, she said, I think this is a big deal and I think you need to get help. And so that was my first time seeking help. And that first year in an outpatient setting, it was feeling like, okay, maybe I have an eating disorder. And then coming around to terms with like, oh my gosh, I have an eating disorder, to this mythical land of recovery that sounds great, but wait, I want my secrets back. And really kind of ping-ponging between those. And the big turning point came in 2010. I took a job where I was working from home. And I deteriorated very quickly in that fall 2010 because I wasn't home by myself. I was home with my eating disorder, and everything just spiraled. And my therapist said, you need a higher level of care. And so on December 14th, 2010, I went to the Carolina House. It's a treatment facility in Durham, North Carolina. And I was there for a good 3 months. And I went with a willingness because I wanted recovery so bad. I wanted to start a family. I wanted a life. I wanted a life with my partner that I loved and adored and was my best friend. And so when I came home from treatment, I knew two things: that I was going to make recovery my job and that I was going to pay it forward. And I didn't know how or when, but I knew I was going to. And one of the big things that we had in treatment was support groups, right? People sitting next to me going, me too. And anyone that is in the addiction space, substance use, eating disorder, mental health, life in general is better when you have somebody sitting next to you going, me too.
Absolutely.
Yeah. And so I didn't have that in Baton Rouge. And I started a blog online, but I started anonymously because I was so still ashamed of having gone to treatment. But a year later, I shared a blog with that friend who I first told. And she was like, you have to let me put this on Facebook. And I was like, absolutely not. And she was like, finally, she said, you don't know who you might help. And that little pay it forward promise came back. And I thought, fine. And so I kept writing and kept sharing, and a group at LSU asked me to come and speak. And I thought, okay, that's cool. And again, like, I had no idea what I was doing. I was not a public speaker at the time, but I called him back and I thought, all right, I'll do this talk, but I've got this other crazy idea. And they said, what? And I was like, I want to smash scales with sledgehammers. And they were like, we're in. And so have done the stereotypical sorority life, also been in marketing, I knew that on a college campus, for something to be successful, you needed a theme with T-shirts and koozies. And so I went home, designed the logo Southern Smash, and Southern Smash was born at the Lakes of LSU on November 16th, 2012. And Ole Miss was our second stop. And it was actually because Ann Morgan, one of my best friends from college, came that night. The next day was LSU Ole Miss game. And I said, Ann Morgan, I don't know what I just did today, but it was really fun, and I've got to do it again. And she was like, let's do it at Ole Miss. And I was like, let's do it. And so that's kind of how Southern Smash was born. I had no idea what I was doing, but I knew I had this drive and passion to pay it forward. And so just really making it up as I went along and never dreaming of what it would be today.
Right. Well, and it was born from someone who had experienced the pain and the grips of an eating disorder. And, you know, if someone had come in college, that could have saved you maybe, 7 years of your life? 15. Yeah. And so I think that's such a beautiful thing, because college, I'm a recent college graduate, is so image-based, especially now with social media. And I know that has only accelerated the presence of eating disorders on campuses. But it really is true, where people are like, you look great. You haven't gained the weight that people gain in college. And there's so much focus on that, especially living in a sorority house, and you never want to get caught. I think that's the biggest thing. You want to do it in a way that looks healthy and sustainable. And so I want to hear more about that first time you were told the diet pills are not good. What was that feeling inside? Were you wanting to kind of be like, what? No, like, defenses up? Or were you kind of like, someone sees me finally and I can be honest?
And yes, that. Because I knew I was going to tell her about the diet pills. So we know eating disorders are brain-based illnesses. They are not choices. And that's another myth that we will continue to smash over and over again. And so often we get all of that confused. Like, well, I'm the one that did this. I'm the one that did this behavior. And for me, and we also know that eating disorders, they form to serve some sort of purpose, albeit it's a maladaptive, way of dealing with life. But nonetheless, I had kind of all the cards stacked against me, a genetic factor. I was a sensitive child. I was, had that perfectionistic tendency. I was bullied in middle school. Like, so all of these little things.
Mm-hmm.
And so what they say is that nature loads the gun and then something later in life pulls the trigger. And so for me, the eating disorder, and for so many of us, quote unquote, works for a while, right?
Mm-hmm.
It works. It's like, okay, it's helping me. It makes me feel like an individual, whatever it is that eating disorder voice inside is telling you. But then there comes that crossing the road where you're like, this isn't working and I
Mm-hmm.
want rid of it.
Mm-hmm.
Just like I thought when I go to college, it's going to be gone. And when I go, and it's just that voice in your head that's constantly, and now I just call them like critical gremlins. We all have a gremlin voice. But for me, the day that I told Anne, I wanted them to be gone. And again, I still had that eating disorder voice saying, it's just those pills. It's no big deal. Kind of like the theme of my eating disorder is it's no big deal.
Mm-hmm.
And our society, the word healthy has been hijacked by diet culture because now it's like, oh, she eats healthy. Well, what does that even really mean?
Mm-hmm.
That means she's not flexible or he's not flexible to have a diet that consists of all foods because we know all foods fit. So in that moment, there was relief, there was shame, there was the whole spectrum of emotions. I think another time that I felt that exhale was when my therapist said, you need a higher level of care to go and to get help. And at first I was so mad at myself for not being better, for not fixing it sooner. Like, gosh, you should have done this. You should have done that. But deep down, I was like, thank God someone is finally giving me permission to go and heal because I knew I was never going to be able to do it at home by myself. And I think one thing that really is important with mental health in general that we have to remember and we have to keep pushing out is that mental health is health. We do not expect someone that has diabetes or cancer to fix it at home, to treat it at home. Here's a Z-Pack, good luck. No.
Right.
When we get to a place in our mental health where it's the home outpatient isn't working, that's the next standard of care. And we have to adapt. Insurance would be a whole nother podcast, but we have to adapt and embrace people as that. I think it's really important that, and it's so important the work and what this podcast does and the work the Magee Center does and what David does and you is that, we have to embrace folks and their loved ones, right? Because it's not just me going to treatment. It was my husband was alone. It was my parents were, I was gone at Christmas. So really thinking through, like, what can we do to support the loved ones as well as the individual experiencing it?
Wow, that's awesome. Yeah, I think a lot of people don't think about the impact that your mental health can have on other people, especially those who love you and who want to see you better.
Yeah.
And I think something, especially with eating disorders, is they snowball. They start with, I'm not going to eat gluten anymore, or I'm going to be dairy free, or I'm going to do this. And then it turns into all gluten is bad. All sugar is bad. I am bad if I eat it. I get sick. Like, it just turns into kind of this monster that is so easily justifiable. And so what ways did you see maybe you or some of your friends justify this diet culture that was really just turning into an eating disorder?
I mean, I see it everywhere in our day and age. And right now it's rampant of like clean eating, right? And it's all just diet culture in disguise. And it's also the notion that thin equals healthy, thin equals happy. For me, I could write off anything because of diet culture, because everyone, if we're going to talk sororities, but like everyone in the sorority house is crash dieting for spring break or doing this or that. But let's not forget that guys are too. I'll never forget driving down to Baton Rouge and a guy friend of mine only got a granola bar, because he was, so we have to not just, this isn't just a sorority girl issue, this is all human issue. And I think what's really important is that when we go into these extremes with food rules, food rules can be one of the biggest red flags, right? It's like, okay, I can't eat this, this, and this. We also need to remember that eating disorders affect all body types. So you're talking about folks that are experiencing anorexia in a larger body, and they're getting written off as they go to the doctor saying, I have a broken arm, and the doctor's like, well, lose weight. So it's not only about this notion that eating disorders equal restriction or food rules. Eating disorders come in all shapes and sizes, all types of behaviors, all types of drives. Like, it's not always a drive for thinness. You have eating disorder called RFID, avoidant restrictive food intake disorder, that can come from a trauma. It can come from being very a sensory, kiddo can have that, and an adult. So it is really important to always put that notion first, that these are brain-based illnesses and that food is just like the tip of the iceberg, and it's not always a drive for thinness. That is encapsulating what that eating disorder is.
Wow. Yeah, I think one of the best parts about this whole mental health initiative is that there's now a language for all of these things. Whereas, even when you were dealing with it, it was just anorexia and bulimia, and there was nothing else. And I think having people like you as a board member of the David Magee Center, or William Magee Center, after David's late son, advocating for the education of the language and putting words in people's mouths to say, oh my gosh, this is what I have, and I didn't even know that was something, and now there's a name for it, and I can claim it and get the healing, especially people who might not fit the stick thin girl on the magazine cover.
Right.
And so I think, number one, that is so important, that there are people advocating for just the education of the language. But there's also so many discrete warning signs that people will give friends that friends might not pick up on, or they just think, oh, she's just trying to look good for spring break. What would you say to someone who has another person in their life, maybe reaching out for help, maybe giving warning signs? How would you say is the best way to approach a conversation that brings up the issue of an eating disorder?
Absolutely. That's one thing we have question all the time. Number one, how to help a friend, how to help a loved one. Number one, get educated. Actually, that would be 1B. 1A would be you can't save your friend. And I don't mean that in a wah-wah. I mean that in a, this is something that even if your friend had cancer, you can't save your friend. So a lot of times when our friends are struggling with depression, anxiety, eating disorders, whatever it is, we take it upon ourselves to lift them up, and it can expend our energy and impact our own mental health. And so number one is, I always say, make sure you're taking care of yourself, making sure you're leading by example, nourishing your body, resting your body, moving your body joyfully. And then as we want to support that friend, best places to do it is not when you're eating, not when you're drinking, in a neutral space. If that friend is exhibiting signs of over exercise, compensation of saying I can't go out because I have to go to the gym, or I can't. If you start to see your friend exhibiting behaviors that are outside the norm of what right? Missing out on things, being, just not as engaged and involved and present, that's when you ask. Get curious is kind of what I say, is not coming in hot with specific.
We need to talk.
You don't come down to eat anymore. You don't do this. You have lost this. You have, whatever it might be. But instead getting curious and hey, I've just noticed that something seems, are you down or whatever? Or you can just say, I don't know what's going on and I might not understand it, but I just want you to know I'm always here to listen. And providing that safe space of empathy. But also the William Magee Center provides great resources, as well as the counseling center here, to know how to support a friend. And one thing you can do is go collect all those resources and say, hey, I will go sit with you at the appointment. I will sit next to you as we make the appointment. But again, it goes back to that friend might meet you with hostility and anger and be like, I'm fine. And there's only so much that you can push because that person is going to have to come to it at their own time. But of course, there are each and every person is so different and nuanced that I would really encourage them to go talk to folks at the Magee Center, myself, or call the Alliance. We have a hotline that is answered by clinicians that loved ones call to get support, to say, how do I do this? How do I approach? We have a support group for friends and family. Attend support groups. Doing those things can help your loved one and help yourself in that path that can be really hard.
Yeah. And what would you say to someone who might be listening to this who's like, I think I fit the criteria. I have kind of been trapped in my mind. This has turned into something I never wanted it to turn into, but I'm too afraid.
Yeah.
What would you say to that girl?
I would say it's okay to ask for help, and it's okay to not be okay, and that you can do things in your time. If you have a safe person, talk to them. But also just knowing that, one of the best things about our support groups at the National Alliance for Eating Disorders is that they're on Zoom. So they're virtual support groups. And so I always encourage, especially college students, hey, you walking into like a physical support group and room can be absolutely terrifying. But with our support groups, you can log on, with your headphones in your bed, in your pajamas, and listen, right? And you will see, last year alone, we had 26,000 people from almost 80 countries attend our support groups. And so you will see this diverse community of folks that are working towards recovery. Some are long in recovery, some are new in recovery. And we have so many folks that is their first step to the journey of recovery. They're like, what's this about? And just, again, it goes back to when I sat in my first support group in treatment and could listen to people talking about their eating disorder, talking about wanting recovery, talking about skills. And I was like, oh God, me too. And so just being able to sit in that space in a virtual setting where you can kind of be hidden and just listen is such a gift. And I really think that, things have changed so much from when I struggled 20 years ago. And I'm so thankful for that. So thankful. But one reason why Southern Smash is called Southern Smash is because I want an event that could make a lot of noise, attract a lot of attention, and my former self might stop by. Because I knew if I sat at a table and was like, come talk to me about eating disorders, nobody's going to come by. Because I'd be like, I don't have one of those. I don't want anybody to see me at that table. But if we make it into an event and we're smashing scales and we're having fun and, and people can do this together with friends, then they can pull me aside and be like, hey, so about this. And also really just breaking that cycle of diet culture that says that you have to do X, Y, and Z to be quote unquote healthy or fit or this or that. And they can break free from that, whether it is the full on eating disorder or whether it's disordered eating or whether it's I am tired of diet culture infiltrating my mood, my day, how I function and live, and being able to smash that literally. And that's really what it's about. But really just going back to that person that's struggling is to know that they're not alone, I think is the biggest thing.
And to know that life doesn't have to be lived that way.
Yeah, for sure.
What was the biggest difference you saw from when you were in kind of the throes of your eating disorder to now? What are things you have now that you never dreamed would be true?
Oh my God, I just got really choked up. I have a family, I live my life very present and authentic and vulnerable. For all my years, even when I was in treatment for an eating disorder, I could not say the word eating disorder because I was so covered in shame, silenced by shame. And I live my life very out loud, very loud, saying all the words that I was once so ashamed of. And I travel all over and I have the privilege of sharing my story. I have the utmost privilege of passing the mic and letting other folks share their story. And the stories, they're messy and complicated and not wrapped up in a perfect bow. And, I've never felt more loved or worthy or beautiful or just being able to show up as I am in my life than I do at this point, And I think that for so long I thought, oh, it's normal to by like 2 p.m. be like so exhausted and dragging, or it's normal to like do this or that. And now I live this life where, food is just food and it has no power or control over me. I get to work in a space with the most amazing humans at the Alliance, and we get to do work that's literally saving lives. Where when I was, a freshman at Ole Miss, I had this notion because I was raised, as we all are, with this thought that, okay, you're going to be a good girl, and that means you're going to get great grades, you're going to go to college, you're going to major in this and that, you're going to make amazing grades, you're going to go out, you're going to get that great internship, you're going to get married, you're going to get the career, you're going to, have the kids. And when I left treatment, I'd worked in corporate America, and I thought what I had was my dream job before I went to treatment, and I quit it. And I came out of treatment, and I was like, oh, I don't want to do that anymore. And I just have made up life on my own terms. And when I started Southern Smash, my parents are like, I'm what is this? They're like, your sister's a doctor. I'm like, it's fine. I'll figure it out,
And you have.
And I have, and that's the really cool thing. And that's what I really push folks to do, is that follow that fire within, because no one can tell you what to do except for yourself. So just keep following that.
And I think one of my favorite ideas and concepts that I've come to discover is the most effective person to help someone with an eating disorder is someone who has recovered from an eating disorder. You know the language, you know the mannerisms, you know the shame, you know the guilt, you know the fear. And Brene Brown says that the antidote to shame is vulnerability.
For sure.
And I don't know what it is about vulnerability, but it is the scariest thing you can do when you're covered in shame. It just feels like you're exposed and you can't hide, and you're just standing there like, take me or leave me, And I think the Southern Smash from all over the nation has allowed a really, really safe, normal space, easy space to enter into and be like, hey, am I crazy? Like, is this normal?
Yeah.
And to have that conversation. And so what's a story or just some fruit from your labor in the ministry or nonprofit of Southern Smash that you kind of hold on to or want to share?
About like a story?
Yeah, or just a conversation you've had that has kind of stuck with you. Or,
I mean, I've had the privilege of hearing and connecting with so many folks. And I think some of the greatest conversations that I've had are folks that will come up to me at events and say, I didn't know I could say I'm really struggling. And I think certainly it's fitting here to share the story of when I was here in 2013. And I'm in the Grove. It's our second event. I don't know what we're doing, but we're doing it. And
it's LSU weekend.
That was when it started at LSU Ole Miss
okay.
weekend. This is in the spring, so it was beautiful. And it was in the spring, and, we're smashing scales, and a group of coyotes come up, and this one girl, she was kind of timid, and, I'm pretty loud and over the top, and I'm like in your face, and I'm like, what's up? And she pulled me aside, and her name was Mary Halley McGee, and she said, I've struggled with an eating disorder, and I'm struggling right now. And so I don't even know. We just started chatting, and she came to the talk that night that we did, and I stayed in touch with her, and she eventually got reconnected with some intense help and treatment. And stories like Mary Halley are so, I'm just privileged to know, because I get to see folks that I've crossed paths with that have taken those next brave steps to enter into their own solid recovery. And now I get the really added privilege, and also feeling really old, of watching these young people that are now moms and fathers and like have families and careers and lives that are far beyond their eating disorder. And that is like this full circle, like pay it forward moment for me. And of course, like when David Magee called years later and we all made the connection, it was like this wild full circle moment again. And, every time I come back to Ole Miss, and this is that I told David one time we were talking, it's like, for years, I had to work on my recovery, and we've had a lot of hiccups in life with a lot of other bumps in the road. And I've just always had this pull, this fire to be like, come back to Ole Miss, come back to Ole Miss, give back to the Ole Miss community. And the fact that I can do that now, and like being a part of the William Magee Center, coming back and hosting Southern Smash. I'm going to talk at the sorority houses tonight. We've connected with tons of campus partners. Being able to do that is really following that fire that I have, that I wanted to give back to this community, because it means so much to me.
And it's so cool that the William Magee Center paves a way for organizations like Southern Smash to come, whereas before you were like, I guess I'm just gonna go on the campus. And
Dr. Valent, she was awesome. I like emailed her and I was like, hey, my name is McCall and we're gonna do this, and she's like, yes, let's do it. She's a dietitian, and she teaches graduate students, and she's just amazing. She's an advocate for eating disorder and mental health with Magee Center too. And so,
and it just takes one person to believe in you and to say yes. And now it has grown into what it has. And hearing Mary Halley's story earlier on the podcast was just, her life wasn't fixed after Southern Smash. She did not leave with this, I'm done, I'm healed.
Mine wasn't fixed after treatment.
It was you just need to take one step.
Yeah.
And she did a 180 and she started walking the other way.
Yeah.
And I think that's all you can do.
Yeah.
You like you were saying, you can't save anyone. It's not your responsibility.
You can't. And I think one thing that I've always strived for is that, I'm not looking to fill auditoriums, or I don't have this huge goal of having lots and lots of people. My goal is to plant one seed of hope. And if I can do that each time, if I have one person come to a talk and that one person I get to plant a seed of hope, then my job's done. It's not about this. It's not about how many likes or how many followers or how many people are in the audience. It's like, if you can just do that one seed of hope, then you've done your job.
I've heard the saying where you just put a rock in someone's shoe that they just can't get out. And it's just, I know, I love that. And just, that's the impact you can make. Yeah. And soon enough, they'll have enough rocks in their shoe. They've got to take the shoe off and deal with it. But hearing your story up until now, it kind of sounds like, and happily ever after. But that has not been the case for you. And so kind of walk me through what the past however many years 10 years have looked like for you and your health and your children.
So life is crazy, and I started Southern Smash in 2012. My son was almost 1 year old, and life just started moving in the right direction. I was finally doing something for me. I felt such passion, and I was so just fueled with this drive. And I kept creating. And in 2014, my husband got a great job opportunity to move for his career, which also meant moving away from my family in Baton Rouge. And that was like, oh, wait, who's going to take care of my son when I travel? And so we moved to St. Simon's Island, and we are pregnant with our second, who we knew was going to be a girl. And we were so excited. And I was actually at an event at UNC, and I left there. And at 25 weeks, I ruptured and was rushed to the hospital. And I was on bed rest for a couple weeks in the hospital. And my feisty girl, Marjorie, came kicking into this world on October 8th. And she weighed 1 pound, 15 ounces. Wow. So Jordan and I joke, because she's great now, but we joke that Grove squirrels were bigger than her.
Okay, those Grove squirrels get pretty big.
They get big. And Marjorie was not as big as those Grove squirrels. And so life kind of flipped upside down in a second. And it was one of those out of body, what's happening, but I drove every day to the NICU, an hour and a half down to Jacksonville, and then an hour and a half back because I didn't want to miss tucking in my little guy. And so just that time was obviously difficult. Anyone that has experienced the NICU knows how difficult it is, and how filled with absolutely incredible angels of nurses and doctors and all the people. But, for me, my recovery was really the foundation of surviving and getting through that, because I knew that in order to be present for my daughter, I had to fuel myself, that I had to listen when the nurses were like, you cannot come here tomorrow. You need to go rest and take care of yourself. I kept writing. Writing was and is to this day the foundation of my recovery and therapy. And we brought her home in December. We survived cold and flu and RSV season. And I remember taking a picture on the beach in April of 2015. And I looked at it and I was like, this is it. I'm back. I had gone back on the road. I had my girl, had my little guy, everybody was healthy.
How long was she in the NICU?
She was in the NICU 2.5 months. So,
wow.
Yeah. So we got her home right before Christmas, which was my hope and dream.
Christmas gift?
Christmas gift, yes. And so with her being, just so small and all of the things, and then we kind of were in the quote unquote clear, I would just remember this fleeting moment of posting this picture on Instagram thinking, oh, life is so good. And the next month, life fell apart because Marjorie was diagnosed with cancer. She was diagnosed with neuroblastoma on May 27th, 2015. And yeah, your world completely shatters in an instant. And, between the NICU and the cancer, and even before that, even in my time to treatment, but more so the NICU and cancer, I learned very quickly that life can become this line in the sand, the before and the after. And it can pop up in these crazy moments that you're like, but we were just fine. 1 week ago, we were not here. And how am I here watching my daughter on a ventilator, And so she was in the hospital. We did some chemo. She did 2-3 rounds of chemo. And it was a very intense, quick time, the way that her cancer was. So it was almost like somebody tossed us into a tornado, and then the tornado spit us out. And from there, we had lots of scans and nuclear injections and all of these things for a treatment protocol follow-up. And so it was years of that. And just trying to get back on my feet the whole time, everybody kept saying, oh, are you going to start, a nonprofit for pediatric cancer or whatever? And I was like, no, I've got to get back to my this was my passion. I've got to get back to it. And and so that time period wasn't just this, summer of 2015. It continued on as we did scans and everything. But a year later, she was declared no evidence of cancer.
Wow.
And since then, she's just really taken off in terms of health. And after the cancer, she then battled years of like pneumonia and asthma stuff. And we're kind of through the woods with that. But that also included hospitalization. So for me, during all of those times, it kept feeling like every time I got my life back in terms of not just being a mom and caretaker, but getting back on the road with what I love, I was getting knocked down again and again and again. And it was like I could not come up for air. And so that's what I mean, like when I talk about like where, being able to leave home now and being able to come back to Ole Miss or come back to like any kind of college and doing what I do, like that was always kind of my North Star. Obviously, the North Star was having healthy kiddos, but beyond that was knowing what this work does that fulfills me so much. But yeah, it took a lot to really overcome not just the physicality of going through cancer with your child, but also like the mental toll it can take.
Absolutely. And you talked a little bit about the role that your recovery played and just the strength and the endurance to walk your child through something like that, which sometimes you think, why did this happen at this time? And what is the Lord doing in this? And then being able to see it and its fruit when you're like, I could not have been dealing with an eating disorder and walking my sweet Marjorie through cancer.
No.
And so how did you see the timing kind of? Was there ever a moment where you were like, this is why this happened then, and so that I could get through this now?
Yeah, I just think that recovery built such a foundation for being able to process really hard feelings. Because for so long when I was in my eating disorder, I've always had huge feelings. I will always have huge feelings. I am a total like sensitive empath, that's not going to change. But what changed in recovery was this skill and gift and ability to be able to process through those emotions and know that I'm going to need a therapist all the time. And like, you will have to pry me off her couch. But because that's part of my health. That's part of my self-care. And during that time period, knowing that I have to physically take care of myself as best I can.
So that you can best take care of.
So I can best take care of them. But also the writing was like, I wrote and blogged every day, and I just chronicled everything from not just like the physical, this is what our numbers are today, but like this is what I'm experiencing as a caregiver, and this is the highs and the lows of it. That was truly like the foundation of it. And I think Marjorie's NICU and cancer journey and her journey with all the pneumonia was this really huge lesson in receiving love and prayers and gifts and support, because I'm so used to giving. And then I had to turn around and receive all of it. And that is a very strange feeling. It's uncomfortable. And I had to learn that, people want to help. And
the same way you're so
that I want to
help other people. I don't know why it's so hard to ask for help or to receive it.
To receive it and just to say thank you. It was, instead of saying, oh my gosh, no, oh no, give it back. And I'm like, And
That's
now
always such a Southern dance.
it's a
No. I would
thing.
never ask
That's
you.
another thing I always tell people. I'm like, would you freaking just accept a compliment, accept a $5 Starbucks gift card, just accept it, right? And say thank you, and move on. But it was humbling, and it was absolutely incredible because I had families that I had helped, their kiddos get, walk the path to treatment, and they were like giving back to us in a million different ways. And like somebody else made shirts for Marjorie, and like, just all of these incredible gifts that had been really woven in the tapestry of the work that I had done, the people that supported my husband in his career, and just you really get to see the landscape of all the love that you've put out into the world that comes right back to you 10,000-fold. And I've always said, like, I will never be able to pay these people back, and they don't want me to pay them back, but I will forever like pay it forward. And like that aspect in the mental health world and all the worlds.
Right. There's a time to give and there's a time to receive.
Yeah, definitely.
Sometimes it feels better to give than to receive.
Yes, for sure.
And so Marjorie kind of entered her journey to wellness, and then you kind of slipped into.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah, so tell me about your story. I don't want to spoil anything. I want you to get to talk about it.
Yeah, so as Marjorie continued her, to get well, and we kept getting great reports, we moved from St. Simon's to where we are now in Ponte Vedra Beach, and I started to notice all of these thoughts that were terrifying about, like really catastrophic thoughts that were terrifying, but also I was looking at them through such a practical lens that is what was terrifying. For example, Marjorie and I were driving behind Jordan and my son Manning, and I totally visualized his car flipping over into the median, and I visualized and went through, okay, I'm going to have to pull over and park. Should I leave the car running so that Marjorie has AC? And then I'm going to go over, and like I am visualizing the worst of the worst happening and how I'm going to do it. And I would start to have these things about, going in the parking lot with the kids to the grocery store. And all of a sudden, I just knew we were all going to get run over. And I would just scoop them up and run in as fast as I can. Or, Jordan wouldn't be paying attention. What if he hit him in the driveway? Like just these absolutely thoughts that did not make sense. And I stopped sleeping. I started having horrible nightmares. And I text my first therapist in Louisiana. I was like, I was up late one night because I couldn't sleep. I didn't want to go to sleep. And that was one of the big things is like, I didn't want to go to sleep because I was so afraid of the nightmares. I was afraid of waking up and remembering all of the things that were happening. And I was like, hey, Mary, I just need some down and dirty skills on how to go to sleep. I'm having like this and that again. She's like, well, I think you need some support. She's like, this can't come through in a bulleted email. And I was like, so she was like, you really need to find a therapist that you can see and process through this. I was like, no. Because not that I'm against therapy, but because we were on the cusp of moving again. And so that move really triggered all of this PTSD because when we moved in 2014 is when basically my world fell apart when Marjorie's born early in the cancer. And so it was really re-triggering all of that. And after I had gone to North Carolina and I happened for a wedding, but I had coffee with my old therapist there, and I was talking to her and sharing just like la-di-da, life is fine. And I left and I thought, I wonder if she's going to come to my funeral was my first thought. So again, just these really bizarre thoughts. I couldn't drive without like visualizing these horrific wrecks. Like everything was catastrophic in my brain. And it got to the point where again, Christy said, you should really find a therapist in Jacksonville and consider EMDR. And I was like, okay. And so that is a great treatment for PTSD. And so I thought, okay, well, she was helping me find one. And I found an EMDR therapist. And so I went through the steps of EMDR. And again, it's not like you go to treatment and boom, you're all better. It took a lot. EMDR was a little bit of a Band-Aid on what I later would discover was a massive gaping hole of CPTSD, which is complex post-traumatic stress disorder. CPTSD comes about when you are hit wave after wave after wave after wave. And again, it was like rinse and repeat from the eating disorder because I didn't know I could like say that I was having these issues, because oftentimes you read about PTSD, CPTSD in this context of like, child abuse and war and, all of these other things. And, here I am with my healthy child and I'm like, can I say this? Can I get help for this? And so I eventually found a therapist that I am still with today, that again, you will pry me off of her couch, that I finally found. And she explained to me that a lot of times EMDR isn't a great fit for folks with CPTSD. And it makes sense to me. And that safe space that she provided and still does, but we did a lot of intensive work in 2022. Also following, I had a prophylactic double mastectomy. We'll throw that one in there.
Just
a few. That
just
did
a little hiccup.
That did result in 7 surgeries because of ravaging infection, but that obviously created its own branch of PTSD, and so
spending time in hospitals
again.
Oh,
yeah. Well, then it was like its own like chapter of like my
Right.
own body and like betraying me and all like that whole narrative, and so. As I kind of the floodgates broke in 2022 and I experienced a horrific CPTSD, I still don't even know what to call it. Like I basically just went catatonic. Like I was I was a not functioning human. And so I was going to see her once, twice a week and just really breaking down all of Marjorie's like moments and memories and my moments and memories within my own surgeries and journey, writing all the time and just doing so much work to dig myself out of the hole that had been there all along, that I thought like EMDR was like, check that box, done. Oops, sorry. So I thought I was like all good to go, and spoiler alert. But now it's my therapist and I were just talking about this. Hard things are going to happen, right? Hard things are happening right now with, my dad is kind of going through some stuff, and Marjorie just got really sick, and things happen. That's life. And in the past, when I was in that CPTSD brain, it was everything is ending. We're like preparing for the worst. Whereas now I'm like, okay, this is hard, and I am still present. My brain is still here. I'm not going off the deep end because now I have those tools and skills to know, and I've done enough healing work that my brain no longer goes to that place of like catatonic frozen and everything is going to end. I can now like take what it is at face value and say, this is a really crappy thing that we're going through, and we're going to get through it day by day. We're going to do whatever we need to do. And I can still function as a person. I can still function and write emails and work. Like I still worked and did the best I could, but it wasn't what I could do because I was suffering so bad.
And I think just with all of the trauma you received and experienced with your eating disorder and the early rupture and then Marjorie's birth and all of that, I mean, it's easy to be like, okay, we're healthy, like everything's good, and we're not going to think about it, and we're just going to keep moving because we don't want anything else to happen. And then you suddenly see the more you push and push and push and push, it's bound to come out one way or another. And there are people who can help you with that. And recovery in any sense, whether you are dealing with, the death of a loved one or deep disappointment or an eating disorder or depression, anxiety, doing the work is always worth it.
Yes.
Because you get to experience, I'll never forget when we had Hudson, David's son, on the podcast. And I asked him a question about, how did your life change after recovery or after your accident? Like, what did you experience? And he was like, I felt like I was living for the first time all over again. Like, everything is new, and I didn't even know to want this life because I didn't know it existed. Yep. And that's what's on the other side of recovery. It's not this check, 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 check. Everything is good, nothing is bad. But it's living life fully with its disappointments and its losses and its hardships and its fears and its, regrets, but also its joys and living in the fullness of having a family and being in a place where you can take care of them and yourself. And so I think your story of recovery just points to everyone to there is a better life that you may not even know.
Yeah, and it's truly to that point, like, you know, living life and being present and wide awake rather than like half there. Because whether it's substance eating disorder, it's all that mental headspace of feeling less than, of not being able to be physically present, mentally present. And even now at this point, 2 years later, after, you know, I started doing all of the really hard work around the PTSD, is that I am so much more present than I ever have been. Like, I'm able to sleep. Who knew sleep was so important? You know, my therapist is always like, let's circle back with sleep. And I'm like, it's fine. It's fine. You know, all of those things. And again, like, recovery isn't like skipping into Candyland and, you know, rainbows and unicorns. It is about taking on the really hard things,
crawling,
doing the really hard things, crawling. One thing that we always say in our Alliance support groups is, you know, when you're feeling like there's no hope, let us hold hope for you. And so recovery is the ability to hold hope for others, but it's the ability to let others hold that hope for you until you're ready to carry it again on your own.
Right. I think through most of the stories we hear on this podcast, especially this episode, is the power of other people. I think in a lot of people's lives, we want to do it for ourselves and we don't want to ask for help and we want to just get better and just do it and no one know and just, you know, brush it to the side. But we need each other and it is not bad to need someone. And sometimes it is the most loving thing you can do is to reach out and ask for help and, you know, vice versa.
And that's what I always say. I'm like, you know, nobody's going to get out of this life unscathed. We've all got a cross to bear, and it's sure a lot easier to bear it out loud and together with others than it is to carry it alone. Because that's what I tried to do for years, because I didn't want to be a burden or I didn't want to look crazy or I was supposed to fit this mold and do this and do that. And then when push comes to shove, like, I feel so much more authentic and worthy than I ever did trying to be something I wasn't.
And you're completely loved now.
Yes.
Not that perfect part of you is loved. It's the messy and the gross and the gritty. And that is what it is to be human, is to show people who you really are and let them love the scary parts of you that sometimes you don't even know how to love.
Yeah.
So, well, thank you so much for coming on to today's episode. Y'all check us out at alittlecrazy.com. Anywhere you listen to a podcast, be sure to share this episode with someone you love, and we'll see you next week.